Welcome to this special edition series, A Strategic View of Hiring, a series of discussions to help you think through and implement smarter and more impactful strategies to recruit and develop world-class talent for your organization. And now, here is our series host, Mr. Rick Tiemann.
All right, welcome back to A Strategic View of Hiring. I am Todd Schnick. I'm joined by Rick Tiemann. He's the president of the executive group. Rick, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, well, today we're going to talk about that phone screen, the candidate phone screen, or as you also call it, a pre-screen. Why do we have to talk about this? What's this all about?
Well, one of the things that I was guilty of myself years and years and years ago before I started this practice is that all of a sudden the candidate shows up for the interview and you're not prepared and you're looking for the resume and you're trying to figure out what you want to ask. And the person comes in and you sit down with the individual and 20 minutes into the interview, you realize there's just not a fit. And you go, well, gee, I wish I would have had more insight or some better way to evaluate whether or not this individual was someone I really wanted to talk to. And so I came up with this whole concept of, it's probably not original, but anyway, it's how do you really vet out an individual outside of just looking at the resume? How do you vet out an individual to make sure that there's form, fit, function, and all the things that you would really want in that candidate? And so I think a phone screen is one of those things that will help you start to screen out, if you will, hence phone screen, help screen out people who you really want to talk to versus people who you probably don't want to talk to.
Imagine it's a common problem, right? Or we wouldn't have to talk about something like this. I mean, how many times, it costs time, it costs money to interview the wrong person, right?
Oh, absolutely. So for example, one of my clients, the president called me and said, I want you to come in and help my sales manager do some interviewing to look at a couple sales candidates. And so when I showed up on his door, I said, so what have you done so far? He said, well, I've interviewed 17 individuals. I said, you've interviewed 17 individuals? He says, yeah. I said, so, well, how many do you think you're going to bring back? He said, well, I think there's maybe 4 or 5. And I said, well, do you mind if I look at the resumes? He says, no. So I looked at the resumes and I handed him 6 resumes. I said, are any of these people the ones you're going to bring back? He says, yeah, how'd you do that? I said, well, first of all, it's learning how to read a resume. But I said, beyond that, it's really knowing what you're looking for other than just interviewing a bunch of people who say they're salespeople.
Well, what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through, Rick, you've developed an outline, a structure to an appropriate and an effective pre-screening phone screen process. But there's probably a couple of key things we ought to talk about before we get into that deeply. Should this thing be 25 questions? How long should your pre-screen call be?
I think the shorter the better, but yet it needs to be long enough to really vet out whether or not there's enough to talk about with the individual to find out how much further you want to move along. So I've developed a couple of key points, and number one is this thing should be no more than 8 to 10 questions. And they should be really targeted questions that really drive at whether or not there's a fit. I think secondly, you don't want to spend more than 20, 30 minutes, especially if you've got a lot of people to talk to and you've got, let's say you've vetted out 100 interviews or 100 resumes and you've got 15 really good candidates. And now you wind up spending an hour each. That's a lot of time. So you got to find a way to really hone that down. And I think with these 8 to 10 questions that I typically like to use, and I try to keep a 10 to or 20 to 30 minute max and I'm going to either screen them out or they're going to screen themselves out within that 20 to 30 minutes. And then beyond them, when I get into those questions, I want to tell them what to expect, what we're going to talk about, how much time I want to take.
Why does that matter?
Well, if you call someone and you catch them off guard and you tell them who you are, my name's Rick Tiemann with the Executive Group, and I'm calling, I got your resume in. And I'd like to have a conversation around kind of what you're looking for and to see if there's a fit and see if we should kind of move to the next level or not. So what I'm interested in doing is just getting to know you right now. And that's the kind of just general conversation. I want to have a conversation. I don't want to do an interview. I want to see how that person sounds on the other end, especially if I'm hiring a salesperson or a customer service person or someone who's going to be on the phone a lot. I want to see how they handle themselves and carry themselves. By the same token, I want to see if, how strong their vocabulary is. I want to see how well they can articulate thoughts and ideas. I want to see how well they can just kind of carry on a general conversation to see if there's a strong enough fit or not. And so I really discourage and stay away from interviewing on the phone, and that's why I call it a pre-screen, and I stay away from using the resume to guide my conversation. because anybody can speak to their resume.
Right.
Of course, no one ever lies on their resume. No one ever embellishes on a resume. So you know all that is true, right? So the whole piece then is that how do I really just get to know that person and just settle in with a conversation? And that's why I've designed the questions and the phone screen as a precursor to what I would call a formalized interview by bringing someone into my office.
Right. This is not the official interview to decide whether you're going to hire someone or extend them an offer. This is to determine if they're worth that conversation.
That's absolutely correct.
And a couple of thoughts here. I mean, at first I was thinking 20 minutes for this. How can you possibly get to know someone to know that? But I now understand that how you design the questions can give you the information, the insights you need to effectively know whether this is worth taking to the next level.
Right. So by really formulating and calculating strategically, which is why the whole workshop is called a strategic review of hiring, most of the times we don't have a real strong strategy around the whole interviewing dynamic. It can be kind of haphazard at times and be kind of unstructured and loosey-goosey, but to me, there should be a method to the madness and a structure behind everything that you do. And the questions create a sequence of events that moves you through the process of determining whether or not this is going to be worthwhile moving to the next level. So each step moves like a chess match in terms of how you sequence the questions and how you tailor the questions and how you move those questions along to an end result on whether or not this candidate is going to be moved to the next level and we're going to bring them in, or this candidate is going to be put in a holding cell, or this candidate's really probably not what we're looking for.
Right.
And I can get that done in 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes sooner.
Well, I imagine there's a lot of people who say, I don't need to worry about a strategy with a phone call, but you really, really do. I'm beginning to understand the real power of that. I've also heard you talk about this idea of where you can't always do this, but there's probably real value on randomly reaching out to someone and catching them off guard, because then you're really going to truly see how they operate versus if you schedule it and they have time to prepare and get themselves ready.
Oh, absolutely. So the whole ad lib, right? I mean, how quickly can they just kind of in the moment engage you? Right, other than have to be so structured and so formalized and so postured that their resume is in front of them that it also becomes it's almost like it's being staged, right? So I want that natural aspect of that person just coming out because I want it to flow, and so I don't use the resume at all when I interview and I do my phone screens.
All right. Well, the top of the conversation, I teased that we were going to go through a comprehensive 8-point outline on how to do an effective phone pre-screen. It's a series of structured questions. We talked about how the importance of designing those questions enables you to really achieve what you're trying to do here. So, Rick, let's lead it off. I guess the first thing we really need to understand is how this candidate initially heard about the position, right? Why?
Well, I mean, that's going to set the tone for the call that you're going to make. So obviously, if this resume has come to you through some type of headhunter or search firm or some type of referral, then there's no surprise to the individual when you call them and they know who you are when they call. But when you're receiving a number of interviews and you're screening them yourself and you're making a blind call to someone who you've gotten a resume from, there's two different angles that phone call is going to take the lead on. So in the series of how we go about building on one question to the next to start to look at the potential for that individual to move further along in the process, I've got 8 questions. Sometimes it might go to 9 or maybe even 10, but my intent is to move through them because they build on one another. So the point of the first one is that if I'm going to call someone and they don't know that I'm calling because I've just gotten their resume, 9 times out of 10, I'm probably catching them off guard. And I prefer that because I like to see how they're going to handle the spontaneity of the call in and of itself. But more importantly, what I'm looking for is I'm looking to see if they're just really shopping the market. I'm looking to see if they really have an interest in changing careers. I'm looking to see if they've even researched my company. I'm looking to see what they know about my company. And so if I ask them, if I called and I said, Todd, my name's Rick Tiemann, I got your resume and you responded to an ad that we have posted and wanted to know if you had a few minutes to talk. So what I'm looking for is if you really know who the executive group is and that rings a bell, unless I placed a blind ad. But more importantly, I want to see if you've done any research on my company. I want to see how you handle yourself. I want to see if you stumble a lot. I'll see how quickly you can gather a conversation around being caught off guard.
That's very telling because if they don't handle that well, then you can just end the call then because it's not worth your time pursuing.
Right. But to expand on that thought, though, and I kind of alluded to this, and that is that if I get the sense that you're just shopping and you're not real serious about this, that's going to help me drive some of my conversation as I move along in my series of questions to see the sincerity and the true level of interest, and whether or not you're just kicking tires and I'm just spinning my wheels and wasting time. I need to find that out right up front.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another reason why I think the phone screen is so critical, because it helps us guard against that person who is just kicking tires and wasting my time.
Yeah. Are they proactively looking to leave their employer? I mean, what's driving that?
Correct.
That's important to know.
Well, they might have had a bad day and they got ticked off with their boss and they're going, I'm done. I'm out of here. I've had enough of this. And, they start flinging out their resume and they haven't really thought out their career, versus the person who's really thought this through and really researched a number of companies and is really understanding where they want to go and what they're worth and what their value is. And they really have an interest in their career, not just, jumping jobs or job hopping.
Okay, so thinking about this now, so now that you've gotten into this first layer of intent, where do you go from there? How do you build on that?
Well, so the first question that you start to drive then is along that line is that, so how did you hear about the position? And what do you know about the company? And what really interested you in the advertisement? So I'm looking to see if they really know what I'm talking about and have any relevance to that. But what I'm really looking for beyond that is to kind of get into my second question. That is, so why are you looking to leave your current employer and what's driving that decision for you to look? And in addition to that, what are you looking for in the next role? And by opening up that dialogue, now I'm getting to see the seriousness, the intent. And so I really have to make sure that they understand the question. And that is, so tell me, Todd, why are you looking to leave your current employer and what's driving this decision today? And also, as you start to think about how you're going to respond to that question, tell me what you're really looking for in your next role. Well, now I get to see whether that person's really thoughtful, really has an understanding of a career move and where they're going next and how they're going to position it and how professionally they present themselves and how they posture that question versus, and now all of a sudden you realize, okay, do I have a really live wire, right? I mean, is this someone who's really intent or is this someone who's just kicking tires?
Right. Because those answers can be very serious and very thoughtful. And you know that this is important to them and they're deep thinking about this role. Or you're also going to find out, I think, that they just don't like their boss, hate the company, hate the commute, don't like their office.
Yeah.
And so they're just trying to get out. Well,
Yeah.
they're going to do that to you down the road.
It's very possible, yeah.
Right.
So, and again, this is what happens if we don't get this kind of vetting out done up front, it usually winds up coming out in that first interview when they come to the office, and then you go, oh, geez, why didn't I figure that out before?
Mm-hmm.
So the second question, it has specific intent to find out their intent, so to see if I'm really wasting time or not.
All right, going from there, I mean, I guess the next step is for you, right, to kind of walk through and provide some information about the job and performance expectations. Why would you go there?
Well, so here's the thing. I want them to understand what I'm looking for in terms of what the expectations of the role is. So what I'm going to do on my third piece here, or third kind of question, or third point, or third bullet point is that I'm going to give them or give you, I'm going to say, so Todd, let me give you a couple examples of the job and the expectations that I'm looking for. And when I'm done with that, I'd like for you to be able to tell me, so how does your experience relate to what it is I'm looking for in a candidate and what I'm looking for in this person to fill this role? As I lay out for you where I'm headed with all this and kind of what the long-range goals and intents are, I want to see how you see yourself fitting in. And again, I'm looking for how well does that person really think about what it is they're doing and what they've done and what I want done and that correlation, and try to see if there is in fact enough substance to what they've done that makes me believe that they get it.
And that's the right fit. Because what I imagine is very common, Rick, in this scenario with a candidate being asked this question is that they become political, they become a politician, they try to dodge the question and reframe it. Oh. And that's very telling, right?
Right, absolutely.
That's you're actually hoping to see that, because that's a clue, all right, this person isn't serious about this.
Right, absolutely. So from there, what I do is I build on that. So once I get that individual talking about, where they've been and what they've done and how their experience fits in, then I try to drive the next question. That's question number 4. And that is, so Todd, tell me, what kind of training experience have you had to prepare yourself for the role that I'm looking for in terms of your education background, maybe self-directed courses or learning? Tell me about your learning style, your learning initiatives, and how you go about preparing yourself as you move through your career. So what I'm looking for in that particular aspect is are they self-motivated? Do they invest in themselves? Are they spending time trying to improve themselves professionally? Do they read a lot? Do they subscribe to the Wall Street Journal? Do they subscribe to, Harvard Business Review? What kinds of things are they doing that tells me that they're a professional and not just somebody who's looking, to jump jobs because the job they're in is too tough?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if they self-invest in improving their skills and their learning and knowledge, then they're also likely going to be receptive to internal training that you offer too, right?
Correct. Yeah.
They're a learner, and that's a good sign.
Right. So in my organization, I'm a big one on self-directed learning. And so I expect, the people that work for me to be self-directed in their learning. But not all organizations, have that mindset or mentality. But again, to me, that's an important aspect of, are they investing in themselves? Not that they go to community college 20 years ago and haven't been back to school since.
Right.
I'm not so sure that person may be as wired as I want them to be, for professional growth. Now, at some point in time, you have to start looking at other aspects of the dynamics. So one of the things that often comes up is relocation. Now,
okay.
If I'm in Chicago and the person's in Naperville, which is an outside suburb of Chicago, that's not a long commute. So I'm not going to talk about relocation. But I have to be cognizant at some point in time, if it looks like there's a relocation issue, I need to talk about that right up front. So one of my questions that I get right up front is that in this job, there's going to be more than likely a relocation. Tell me about whether or not relocation is within your current purview, or that there's a possibility that is not going to pose a problem when we get down to the wire if we decide that we're going to go further. I don't want to be surprised at the end finding out that the wife doesn't want to move, or a husband doesn't want to move, or we want to wait till the kids are out of high school. And I don't want to have that conversation after my second or third interview to find out that this isn't going anywhere. There's just certain things that you need to address right up front. And so if this job, is going to have some type of relocation, that's got to be built into the pre-screen right up front in terms of a conversational piece.
Hearing you say that, Rick, I'm just shaking my head. That tells me that it's a common scenario that an organization advances someone deep into the interview process and they don't know the answer to that question yet, and it's all moot if they don't want to move. What about if someone wants to work from home? You got to know that too, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, and so does the job require working from home? So in many sales organizations where they work remote and work from home, then relocation isn't an issue. But sometimes travel is part of the job. You've got to talk about the travel and the travel expectations as well, because I think oftentimes when we have jobs that we're trying to fill that are hard to fill, that may not have, the most advantageous aspects of the role itself, we tend to oversell those. We're very reluctant to talk about the negative side of the job for fear of turning people off. Well, I'd rather find out now than 90 days into the job that it's not what they signed up for, and now they leave and go somewhere else in 90 days. And I've got all this time and money invested. There's just so many things that we do wrong as organizations in our ability to really vet out people and find the right fit.
All right. Well, gosh, if we're talking about relocation and whether they want to be working from home, I guess we have to get to that next elephant in the room question. And we really do need to understand where they are thinking in terms of their salary and their earning expectation. Yeah.
It absolutely blows me away when I talk to clients and they've been through a first or second interview and the topic of remuneration hasn't even surfaced yet.
Yeah.
And we don't know if
I can't even imagine that would...
Listen, I can't tell you the number of times in 27 years of working with clients at this level, it happens. But let's talk about how you move that away. Many people are reluctant to talk about money. And 9 times out of 10, when you ask a person about money, you're always going to get a pat answer. And that pat answer typically is, well, I mean, I make a good salary and I imagine we're not too far apart, but money's really not the most important thing. It's, quality of life and work-life balance and working for a good company and company where I can settle in and maybe retire in. And, that's... It sounds...
It sounds good. And am I assuming that you would hear that and say, okay, well, I don't have to worry about that, when in fact, yeah, you do.
You do. Because people, what I've found over the years is people, they're not going to make a career change for less than 15% of their current salary.
Mm-hmm.
It just, economically, it just doesn't matter. So if my job offer is a base of $75,000 in commissions, and they're already making a base of 100 plus commissions, or anything in that range, there's too much of a salary gap there. And I need to find that out up front. So I am absolutely adamant about, in the phone screen, that compensation has to be included in that conversation to make sure that we're within ballpark. And what I typically would say is, I say, well, Todd, all this sounds good so far, but one of the things I really would like to understand is, tell me what your earning objectives are and how that compares to your current situation. In other words, how are you compensated today? Is it a salary, commission, bonus? And what is that? And that's when I get the pushback of going, because it catches people off guard, because most interviewers don't go there.
Mm-hmm.
And
apparently not very often on a screen call like this.
Oh, no, I don't
From
see
what
it.
You're telling me.
Not that I've noticed. Now, maybe it happens more than I'm aware of in the marketplace, but I doubt it. But to me, I want to get that out up front, because it's a pivotal point to know whether or not we're in the ballpark.
If they try to dodge it, I don't know that you can continue the conversation.
Well, I don't.
Right.
I don't. So the important thing the thing that I do, and that I encourage people to do, is as soon as I ask you that question about compensation, and I get the typical pat answer of, well, it's money, not money that's important to me, it's, yada, 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 I automatically come back and say, Todd, I'll be the first to agree. I appreciate that. I understand that. I even value that myself. However, I ask you a question about your compensation, and I need to understand where that's at. And so I'm not going to go any further in our conversation until we get that off the table to make sure that we're in the relevant range. So they know I'm serious about whether or not this is going to be a good fit. And there's no surprises down the road when we start to make an offer. And I get 2 interviews down the road, and we're too far apart on salary.
Yeah.
And then all that work we've got invested just blows the deal, because people are afraid not to talk about that.
We're just afraid to talk about money.
Yeah.
And especially in a situation like this where it's critically important.
Yeah. And I'm a believer that you just don't bypass that. Now, again, that's my opinion, and there may be companies who aren't comfortable with that and don't want to do that, and that's fine. But I think they'll find themselves somewhere down the road wishing they might have added that into their phone screen process.
All right. Well, that's important. For most of my career, I have not been that intense about understanding that, and I recognize the importance of doing that. So that's important. I thank you for sharing that. So I guess the next area we need to be thinking about is really effectively communicating to the candidate about the complexity or lack thereof of the entire hiring process, right?
Yes, especially the clients that work with me in terms of how they use our process and the assessment process that we use. And so what I like to have my clients especially, talk about with those candidates is upfront disclose to them, look, Todd, here's the thing is that our assessment process includes a number of interviews with a number of different people at a number of different levels in the organization. It also includes a series of assessments that you may or may not go through as this progresses. And the time frame for our process is longer than most. And sometimes that could be as much as 3 to 4 weeks before we even get to the offer stage. So I need to know whether or not your time frame will accommodate that, or whether or not you've got other things that are working in your favor right now, that maybe you've got an offer on the table, that you need an answer sooner rather than later. And I'm just telling you up front, that's probably not going to happen, here. So you need to know that going up front. So I try to get that open up to see are they looking? Is there another offer? Are they going to play that against me? And how do I know that they're serious about moving on? These are all things, if I can get them ironed out in the phone screen, got a much better shot at making sure that we're moving forward in a positive fashion, that we're going to have a much better conversation when I bring you into the office and I got all this other stuff out of the way. Which again, goes back to the point of, this is why I don't interview, and this is why I use a phone screen, and this is why I don't use a resume in my conversations to interview off of. And this is why I have more of a scripted approach to, this is a sequence of events and the series of events and the series of questions that I think are pertinent to get to whether or not this deserves for us to move forward.
Well, what I'm finding fascinating as I'm hearing you go through all this is my first thought was, all right, this is a process to protect you, the hiring organization.
Absolutely.
To save you time, and it certainly is that. But this is also showing a lot of respect to the candidates, too. You're developing a process that's going to be respectful of their time.
Well, that's a great point. And that is that they need to know that I've got their best interest and the company's best interest at heart, and that these are things that help them and us understand whether or not we're the kind of company they want to work for, and whether or not they're the kind of candidate we're really looking for to make this a much better fit down the road.
Yeah. Well, speaking of disclosing your hiring process and the timetables associated with that, I imagine you also, and this is probably the final component here, is disclosing to the candidate very specific job recommendations. Is it a financial institution? Do you need to have a degree? All those kinds of things, yeah?
Yeah, so I kind of put a disclaimer at the end, and I will typically move from my last question or my last statement around how our process takes longer. And I'll kind of end with this. I'll say, Todd, one of the things that is built into our process that adds to that length of time it takes to make an offer is that we do a drug and alcohol screen, we do a background check. And because we do those things, you'll be asked to go through those yourself. And so now's the time to tell me if there's anything that you may have concerns around that we'd rather get on the table now and not have any skeletons in the closet and things that we don't want to find out later. Is there anything that would prohibit you from moving to the next step with us, knowing that of the sequence of events that we go through? Is there anything that would prohibit you from declining at this point in time if I were to make you an offer to come in and have a further conversation and interview with a couple of key executives?
Well, this would be a chance for the candidate also to say, Rick, I had a DOI 15 years ago. Is that going to be a problem? And you're going to say, no, absolutely not.
Exactly.
Or whatever the case may be.
Right. So if I can create that open dialogue that, again, I'm back to having a conversation, right? These are the fundamental things that we need to kind of vet out in our interview process that helps understand whether or not the candidate we're looking to bring in, and because when we typically bring someone in, sometimes there may be 2 or 3 individuals that they meet with, or maybe there's a group of people they meet with. Well, you're tying up executives' times, or you're scheduling that person to come in and spend an hour with the VP, an hour with the sales manager, an hour with the ops manager, and only to find out that you just don't have a fit.
Wait, you don't have a degree? Oh, no. Plenty of those horror stories I've heard.
So those are the fundamental, and there's certainly other things that you can ask, but I found that these kinds of things that I'm trying to get out on the table shouldn't take more than 20 to 30 minutes. And again, it's helping really understand whether or not we want to move to the next level. So doing that is what I call my phone screen process. And it's a precursor to whether or not I really want to bring someone in. But it also allows them to withdraw themselves from the equation and bow out gracefully as well.
All right. Well, but at the beginning of this conversation, Rick, I was thinking, how are you possibly going to know in 20 to 30 minutes? But after walking through those 8 points, those 8 structured steps, makes very, very much sense to me how you could absolutely understand whether this person is going to be the right fit for your organization. So great stuff. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for now. Should anyone have questions on any of this, Rick, and want to learn more, where do they go?
Well, our website is www.theeg, which is short for The Executive Group, or theeg or theeg.com. Our office number is 219-477-6378. We've got a number of things on our website to help companies in their research and background, and there's other modules that support this in terms of hiring and interviewing that they can research as well.
All right. Rick Tiemann, the president of the Executive Group, and Todd Schnick, thank you for tuning into this module of A Strategic View of Hiring. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the special edition series, A Strategic View of Hiring. This series is made possible by the Executive Group, linking human capital with strategic intent, building organizational talent, and developing both world-class leaders and Salesforce effectiveness. To learn more, visit the Executive Group online at theeg.com. That's theeg.com.